welcome to the introduction to SaltStack Enterprise 5.0 session. My name is Matt Meservey. I'm the product manager at SaltStack. I own the enterprise product. Just for a real brief introduction, I've got close to 20 years in the data center systems management space, both as a systems administrator and both large and very large and very small scale infrastructures, up going from 20,000 at the largest and down to a couple dozen at the smallest. I have a long time in delivery of enterprise software. I managed the infrastructure management product that did north of $100 million and was eventually sold to Symantec through Altiris. So I have a lot of time working with systems administrators and kind of seeing your lives and what you guys do. So today we're going to talk about the next step in the evolution of SaltStack Enterprise. The first thing I'd like to do, with me is Rob Booth, and he is from Texas. Round right, Rob? Rob is one of our solutions architects for I want to say enterprise product, but for all of the products, really, you're kind of the jack of all trades. With Salt, both open and enterprise. I appreciate you. We'll be driving the demos today and kind of walking you through the product. What we'd like to accomplish today is I'd like to kind of give you a high-level overview, and I will tell you out of the gate that the product is not complete yet. It's getting very close. We're very, very close to beta. If you were in the lab yesterday, this will be somewhat of a rehash since we got some extra time and we're able to go into some extra stuff. If you don't want to see the same content again, feel free, or I'll understand. But it's going to be kind of the same stuff as we did in the hands-on lab. But more importantly than that, more importantly than showing you guys the product and what it's going to look like in the direction we're going, I'd kind of like to spend some time finding out what your guys' lives are like. As a product manager, my job really is to find out what the challenges are that you're trying to solve, and then deliver solutions that solve those problems easily for you. And so it's, as you can tell, I don't fit in seats the best, so it's better if I get a whole bunch of you to come to me, and then we can get a really good cross section of feedback without me wedging my fat backside into a plane. And plus, I have a kind of a long and colored history with the TSA. That's a story for another time. But anyway, so I'm glad you're here, I guess, is the end result there. So tell me a little bit about yourselves. So how many in here would consider themselves development staff? Okay, a few. That's good. Now, who here has used Salt already? Okay. Who here considers themselves or works with the IT management, or what I would call IT ops? You manage IT infrastructure in some way, shape, or form. Okay. And then, because I wasn't paying attention, who here is pretty new to Salt or just learning about it? Okay. Who here are Python developers or familiar enough with Python to get what you need done? Okay, a little bit, yeah, same. Who here is not familiar with Python and kind of needs an easier way to access the power of Salt? Okay. Who here loves the command line, open source? Okay, keep your hands up. Of the people who have the command line and the open source, who has other people they work with that aren't as comfortable and need something a little easier to consume? Okay. All right, now out of the general crowd, who here is interested in a Salt stack that's easier to consume and easier to use? Okay, so pretty good numbers. That's what we've seen as we've gone forward, is that we found that SaltStack, a tremendously capable open source tool with tremendous capability to manage massive infrastructure, and does exactly what it was designed to do, which was execute things very, very quickly in a distributed and highly scalable manner. Fantastic. And frankly, I don't think there's anything better on the market. If there is, come show me, but I'll tell you why you're wrong. And that's not just because I work here. I only work here because SaltStack can do those things that we were trying to sell in previous lives and could never do. And because SaltStack can do the things that I had when I was sitting in the seat of a sysadmin, every vendor in the world told me they could do and never could quite deliver on. SaltStack can deliver on it. But it has some limitations. the open source product. It does what it does very, very well. But what we heard over and over from customers was, we need an easier way to access this. As easy as Salt is, it's not easy if you're not a Python developer. It's not easy if you're not a Linux native. It's not that easy if you're not native to the command line, or if you don't like digging around in scripts and logs to try to find out what happened with jobs. So a graphic interface became something of importance to us. And if you've been with SaltStack for very long, let's see, show of hands, who's used SaltStack for more than 2 years? Okay, of those, who's seen previous iterations of Enterprise? A couple of you, okay? We've had a couple of passes at Enterprise. You know, first we had this sort of proof of concept called Halite, which was a first attempt at putting a graphical interface on top. Learned some lessons there. Then we repackaged the open source packages and did some additional testing. Called those Enterprise, and of course that doesn't really satisfy the need of an IT team who has someone who doesn't like to spend time in the command line, or who needs something that they're not a Python developer. Then we released Enterprise 4 last year. Enterprise 4, interesting story, and we'll just talk about it now if you've heard of it. We released it around SaltConf last year. We found out very quickly that while it was a capable and a functional product, and we actually have customers using it, and it did the basics pretty well, it was designed in a way, first of all, it accessed the Salt Open API, and which was tied to a single master. The front end we used was also a little slow, and it was hard to scale. And as we looked at the work it was going to take to get it to Salt scale, we realized we've got to rebuild this thing. We've got to add something new. So we looked and looked, and Tom and the team huddled, and they came up with this thing which was originally known as RAS, Returner as a Service. And that's probably the last time you'll hear me use that name, because Returner as a Service was a way to provide data to multiple masters and manage an enterprise level, basically API set, very efficiently. That product grew and morphed and changed, and over the last year we've added so much to it that it is now known as the Enterprise API. It's an entirely new API. It's separate from the Salt Open API. It is a proprietary API. It does tie directly to our console, and it provides a bunch of stuff. So, wow, I don't know if we can see this. We're going to try. Imagine if you will. So the way that it works is this. You have your minions, at the normal minions. You have your normal Salt masters, and you have your normal Salt Open. That's another thing. If you guys were users of the early Salt Enterprise builds that were basically rebuilds or repackages of the open source stuff with some additional testing and the ServiceNow connectors and those kinds of things, one of the things customers didn't like is it's hard to track, well, do I have an open source minion or do I have an enterprise minion? So we're actually deprecating those packages. The Enterprise API and Salt Enterprise 5 is built on the open source underpinnings for a couple of reasons. A, it makes it easier for you guys to track. You don't have to worry about what version of the minion is an open source or enterprise minion. You don't have to worry about your version of Salt. You just run the Salt that we tested against. And then on top of that, we have the Enterprise API. So the Enterprise API, we're calling it that. It's a technical name. At some point in the future, we'll actually package that up and sell that as a product to people who do not want the UI that we have developed and may want to integrate their UI may want to integrate the functions of the SaltStack Enterprise into their own UI. In this room, who is interested in taking the Enterprise API and building their own UI on top of that? 4 or 5? Okay, you guys have teams of developers that can build a UI front end? Okay, good, okay, good. That's good feedback. Probably what, Rob? 5% maybe? 7% maybe? Okay. So yeah, you'll be happy to know that at some point in the future, it is on the roadmap, I can't give you a date, but at some point we'll actually package this up and offer that as a sellable SKU that you can use to tie the SaltStack Enterprise functionality into your own front end. For the rest of us who don't have big budgets and tons of front end developers and time to develop your own front end, we also offer the SaltStack Enterprise 5 console, which ties to the Enterprise API. So let's talk a little bit about this Enterprise API. What is it? Like I said before, API is a bit of a misnomer. It is a pack, or it is a collection of APIs. It's RESTful endpoints that you can get data from. It ties to the masters. When you install SaltStack Enterprise, you put what we call the master plugin or the enterprise plugin on top of each open source master. that allows those masters to communicate up into the enterprise API and then eventually the console. And it provides a lot of services. First, it returns data. It tracks all of our targeting data, as we'll see in a second. Targets in SaltStack Enterprise are persistent, which is important in production infrastructure. You want to make sure you're dealing with the same set of machines or same definition of machines all the time. Jobs are also persistent. This goes towards this concept of building jobs, testing them, making sure they're pretty concrete, and then handing them off to someone to go ahead and run those tested jobs, so you know that the things you're doing to your infrastructure are consistent and well tested. It has some other stuff in there. So, who's completely new to Salt? Several new people. A bit of backstory, and I'm sorry if we're covering old ground for the geniuses in here. Everything in Salt runs on an event bus. So these minions, and one of the maybe the most brilliant part about Salt, amongst many, is the fact that all of the workload is really done on the minion layer. So what happens is you run a state, but functionally what's happening is a state gets published and applied to a target. The minions handle all the workload. So that data gets communicated down over the event bus, and then things happen, and then it sends events back up the bus. The masters capture the events and do what they want to with them. Most of the time, they just store them into the job or event cache for 24 hours and then discard them. We have some ancillary technologies like reactors who can listen to events and do things if they see certain types of events. You're going to hear tomorrow about a new type of a reactor, an intelligent reactor. It's currently codenamed Thorium. Tom will lie to you and tell you it's done and it's ready. It's still sort of an open source project. It's got some work to do. I'm very excited about Thorium. The reactors are basically single condition reactors, so they listen for a single condition. Thorium allows a reactor to have some business intelligence in it. So a single reactor might say, listen for a failure event. If a failure event happens, send a notification or push data. The Thorium reactor will allow you to listen for multiple events and then make decisions based on what types and how many of those events come. So I may get a failure, but if the failure is not in production infrastructure, don't do anything. Or I get a failure, it's in production infrastructure, and it's on a box tagged important. That's 3 of my 4 criteria. Go ahead and run the event, whatever that is. Reset the box or redeploy the state or whatever. So the intelligence that sits there, so you've got the reactors, and eventually we'll have the Thorium up there. Everything listens for events. So we have another thing up here called an E-filter. The E-filter allows you to capture certain events off the stream and stick them into a database. And I should have put a database icon up here. Imagine, if you will, a database right about here. Looks like a beer can, like every database and every slideshow you've ever seen. Looks like a beer can shot full of holes or has lines all around it. Anyway, data storage is one of the most important things you can have in an enterprise infrastructure. Who cares about auditing and history of what happens in their infrastructure? Right? It's fairly important. Who cares about security auditing? Right? If you don't have your hands up, you're either just being lazy or you really like finding jobs. People who don't track security in specifically production infrastructure tend to bounce around a little bit. And if you've worked in IT infrastructure management for more than 2 or 3 years, I know you've got a dozen stories of people who made dumb mistakes and didn't keep their eye on the ball and wound up looking for jobs. So the eAPI handles all that. It handles data storage. It's got some business logic in it. It's got reactor capability in it. It's got a bunch of endpoints which allow you to return data and interact with the enterprise system in a variety of ways. And it really forms the heart or the core of what the enterprise product can do for you. And in a nutshell, what the enterprise product brings is it allows you to take the power of Salt and expose the power of Salt kind of to the masses, to the rest of your team who may not be comfortable with Python, or maybe expose them to someone who is comfortable with Python, but you don't want them in charge of your production web store servers. Maybe you only want them in charge of your QA servers. It allows you to really segment. Oh, the other thing I glossed over is RBAC, our role-based access control model. The enterprise API provides full RBAC security, so you can create roles, assign those roles rights, add users to those, and then control who can not only do things in the system, but even what they see. So for example, what I would call an IT ninja, but I talked to a user yesterday who now calls them alpha geeks, which I love the term alpha geek. You have your alpha geek, and he can go in and create roles and create assignments and create targets, and then assign those things to someone like me who's not an alpha geek, but I'm competent. I can do I can do the jobs, do the things I need to do, but it really limits the damage and the exposure. And in mass production infrastructure, that's really, really important. And that RBAC model also sits up in the API layer. And then one of the last things, I hate to call this out because this is normally sort of implied, but one of the things about the GUI and one of the reasons we didn't like some of our earlier implementations, the Halite and the Enterprise 4 ship, was because they simply weren't that easy to use. And in today's day and age, I asked this question in the keynote, but did anybody get more than a 2 to 3% budget increase last year? Must not be any military. You work for the government? Investment? Banking? Okay. E-commerce? But you got a budget increase? Are you embezzling? Are you hiring? Sort of he's embezzling and sort of he's hiring. I'm not sure if the sort of was embezzling or hiring, but let's talk later. The point is, it's very rare for IT departments to get increased budget. Now, who got increased requirements, bigger infrastructure, more stuff to do last year? Okay? Those of you who thought your hands up are very lucky. If you look at Gartner, like the average increase year over year is somewhere between 5 and 17% in infrastructure, depending on what segment of the market you're looking at. And in the last few years, it's been much higher than that because of cloud infrastructure. As people move to public cloud, you're getting more and more infrastructure thrown at you. It's becoming more and more complex. And yet budgets and IT staffs are relatively static. Anybody grown their staff significantly in the last year or two? Okay, couple. How much? Percent-wise? 120%? Startup? Okay. Good. Okay. They found out that DevOps is good. Fantastic, we like to hear that. So DevOps is an interesting discussion. I won't go into it because most of us know what it is, but if you want to boil it down to a single concept, it's automation. You automate everything, you make sure everything's tested, and you treat your infrastructure like code, and things happen, better things happen. So ease of use is a big one for us, and I think you'll see when we get to it, that ease of use is something we've worked on, and extensibility is also something we've worked on. We understand that users go through things different ways, and getting to them in an easy way is something that's important to us. I skipped reporting. Reporting, everybody understands reporting. Reporting is how you sell solutions to your boss. They like the charts, they like the colors, they like the graphs. Reporting in the first version, I'll just throw it out on the table. It's probably the weakest area of the product for us, and we'll talk about it when we get there, mostly because all the reports are pre-written right now, and it's one of those things that we're working on a report builder, but when it comes down to, it's a traditional product, it's a traditional software problem. Do we hold another month and put it in, or do we ship it with the reports and then throw the report builder in? And you'll see why we made the decision to go ahead and ship it with the pre-builts, but never fear, we're getting a report builder, and we've also given you an ability to kind of end run the report system that we'll talk about. And then auditing. Auditing is the last thing I want to talk about. When you're talking about managing infrastructure, and specifically production infrastructure, auditing becomes ridiculously important. And I'm also going to throw another term in here, compliance, okay? You have auditing for internal purposes. You come in and your production customer web store is down. You need to know why. You can't just go turn it back on and I hope that never happens again. You got to figure out why. Auditing is tremendously important. The enterprise product allows you to audit or track the history of 3 things: target groups, jobs, and users. So I can go to any target group and I can see every job that's run on that target group and who ran them. I can go to any job, I look at who's run those jobs and where, and I can go to any user and see what they've done, including jobs that were run or things that were done through the command line. So if someone goes into the command line, logs in and runs a job, the enterprise API will grab that from the job and the event cache and stick that in the history so you can track those things. And then the other side of that same story is compliance. Enterprise 5, because it's multi-master enabled and it manages minions all over the place, means we can have targets that cross multiple masters. So really the first time you'll be able to do that with any of our enterprise GUI-based products. You can kind of kludge it together in the open source, but it's still hard to do. It's still hard to go get data and figure out what exactly happened. But we also are providing a report called a compliance report, which will tell you which machines are compliant with your high state and which are not. And so that's a report that you can run at any time and say, tell me if I'm in or out of compliance state. And as long as your high state compliance is compliant with your needs, whether those are PKI compliance or HIPAA compliant or just your base software footprint compliance, you'll know at an instant if everything's in or out of compliance, and you can decide that before you go out and start redoing state runs and doing remediation. So Rob, I'm gonna have you pull the thing and we'll switch over. And I think what we'll do is we're just gonna kind of walk through the GUI, and I'm gonna show you, I'm gonna keep this thing. I'm gonna kind of talk about the design guidelines and why we made some of the decisions we made. Again, we're pre-alpha. You're gonna notice some potholes in the UI, and trust me, we're tremendously sensitive to them. We know they're there. Feel free to point, laugh, and giggle when you run into them, because we do the same thing. I apologize if I start cursing. It upsets me, but we're getting there. We have 2 more sprints before we think those things are all in. First thing to understand is workflow, okay? Everybody does things a different way. What we found out is, as we talk to users, is users usually start jobs one of 2 ways. They start from the perspective of a target. I know the machines that I'm gonna do something to, and then I gotta find a job and put them on. That's starting with the target. That happens about, I like to say 100% of the time, and everybody's always like, nope, I don't do that. So I say 95% of the time to cover myself. The other way they start is they start from the perspective of a job, okay? And there's a jobs workspace. And when people say, when you start from the perspective of a job, it's usually around a software vulnerability. They say, oh, I gotta fix the shell shock vulnerability, so I know the job I need to run first, then I'll go find the machines that I need to target. But usually in their head, they know they're not gonna blast that fix out to the entire infrastructure at once. They usually wanna apply it to a test box or a test crowd a few times. So even then, they kind of start from the perspective of targets. So we have these workspace switchers up on the left. First one is the targets workspace. This is actually getting some refactoring before ship. It's currently not in the form that we like it to be. The targets give you a list of targets that you have available to you. Once you select a target, go ahead and select the all minions. You are now in the context of the all minions target, and you can see the minions that you have available to you. You have some options up at the top right here. On the left, you have what we call a filter bar. The filter bar allows you to filter and create other targets. This is traditional SALT filtering. So I can choose a grain target, I can choose a glob target, a list target. What he's doing is choosing grain, he'll choose OS family. Now I want you to see something. Go ahead and click on Debian again, Rob. This is kind of interesting, and the filtering is actually very, very smart. Is Sam in here? Sam?
Yeah, he's back there.
That genius in the back is the guy who had to suffer through building this filtering thing, and it's phenomenal. So high five that guy if you walk past him. Brilliant people. It's shocking. It's scary to talk to them sometimes. The dev team at SaltStack, honestly, and I'll tell you this, Scout's honor, I was an Eagle Scout. The developers at SaltStack are the best developers I've ever crossed paths with. It is a phenomenally capable set of people, and I could not speak more highly of our dev team. Both our open source and our enterprise guys are scary, scary smart. So the filter bar only filters for data that you have. So he picked OS family, and the only grain I have is Debian, because that's all we have. What this does is it means you won't build blind filters for data that's not there. You can do it if you want to using a glob filter, but it's actually pretty smart in returning the data that you want. So you filter down, find the machines you want, and then you give it a name and create it. You now have another target group available to you. And you'll notice that it shows up in the list, and we have a couple different targets we can use. The idea here is the first rev of the product, and if we have time, we maybe go through roadmap a little bit, but we really are going in 3 phases. First phase is the basics. It's managing infrastructure. It's doing everything that Salt Open does, and then some other stuff. The next phase is going to be sort of predictive automation, where we're going to start to provide content for you. We're going to have actual job. When I get to jobs, I'll talk about that in a second. And then the third phase is sort of this. We'll talk about it later. It's clearly an NDA discussion, but it's something you've never seen us do before. It's going to be fantastic. Once you get a target, you then have some things you can do. So next to the filter bar, we have the action buttons. The action buttons let you do stuff to this target. So if you want to run a job, you click on the job action button, and you'd run any of the jobs you have there. Right now, we just have test.ping. It shows you exactly what's going to run. You have the option to notify on completion or failure. You can check either one of those. We have some additional options which will be coming in the future. There will be some things that we can do, such as pop-ups or maybe integrations with Slack or some other notification options. But then he's going to go ahead and run the job. And then that job, you get some success data back there. And then that job will actually show up down here. This thing is called the view switcher. What the view switcher is it allows you to switch the contextual view of the target you're in. So currently we were looking at the list view. Now he's switched over to job history view. This is a history view of everything that's happened in this particular target. So you can go to any target. Here's our notifications come streaming in. And we have a bug here that we didn't put the job name in here. We'll fix that. But basically what happens is every time a job is run, anytime a job is run by anybody who has access to this job or target, it's going to show up in the job history list. And also within the job history list, and this is actually this is one of those features, like it's kind of basic. It's like, okay, well, yeah, whoop-de-doo, but it's super nice. Where did it go? If I go to the information button over here in the actual job return, this is Robin, my favorite gig, is he starts to show stuff that gets him excited. I can't remember what we're doing, and so we bounce back and forth. We actually take all the data and roll that up so you can actually see all the return data for the job right within the job history. So if I look at a job and I find out that it failed on, we have a field missing here that shows how many minions were targeted and how many succeeded. We're putting it in, but it's just not in here. You can actually drill in and see which minions succeeded and which ones failed, and you can actually get the return history for those. We're adding a feature in the future to create a target group out of failures. If you have a failure, you can actually create a target group and assign that target group to someone else to go do remediation or root cause analysis on. But the end point is that no matter how many minions you have and no matter how many masters those are spread across, when I run a job, I suddenly have access to all the data. So go back to the target list again real quickly, Rob. On the target list, show me the list of my 2 targets. It's a giant list of 2 targets. Click on the target list. So this target list, actually hold the list out just for a second. This target list is actually controlled by our RBAC model. So if you do not have access to the whatever target that is, because I can't read it, the My Ubuntu, My Ubuntu, I won't even see it. So the idea here for the first rev is for the Alpha Geek or the IT Ninja or the SALT guy. He brings in Enterprise, he sets it up, he creates a bunch of targets, he creates a bunch of jobs, he integrates it with his Active Directory LDAP, and then he assigns those targets and jobs to the people who are responsible for those particular targets. He can then give them a variety of rights. He can say, you're an admin over that group, which means that guy can create new jobs to run against that target group, or he can modify or add to that target group, or he can just basically make him a user of that target group, which means you're in charge of that group, but you can only run the jobs we've created for you. So you can't be creating new jobs and doing different things. This is what you can do to that group. So you can really control who has access to what and what they can do within the system. You can even do something as devious and awesome as an IT administrator. You can even do something like assign someone a job and no target, but you can build the targeting data into the job. So you may have a job that just says reset the VM cluster. They don't even need to see the VM cluster. All they need to know is just I can go in and run this and reset this VM cluster, or I can run the job that says rebuild the VM cluster, or restart the test path, or restart the run. So you can actually really control who has access to what. Okay, so this is the jobs workspace, or this is the targets workspace. You have filtering, you have buttons you can do. This is a jobs button. The other one is a key management button. Everybody kind of knows what that is. That's where you accept and reject keys. And then this is a pillar settings button. We can actually tie an individual pillar to a target. So that target has a place. Everybody familiar with pillars? In a nutshell, pillar is an off minion data store. So a lot of the data that minions carry sits on the minion, but if you flush the minion, it's dead. A pillar is an off minion data store, and that's where you keep all your secret data. So it's data that's not accessible to the other minions. A minion can't see other minions' data in the pillar store. So you can set a default pillar for an actual target group that it will use for any of the jobs that it runs. And then the view switcher we talked about. Before we go anywhere, let's look at the summary view for view switcher. Okay, what the summary view is, we saw job history view. What the summary, and this, I apologize, this is still in a work in progress. There are more graphics being built. What the summary view is sort of a dashboard view for this particular target. So you can click over and get a real quick look at compliance levels, versions of minions, what minions are available, what their connection status is. You can actually drill down and see the actual minions in the list, and you can actually export those as CSV if you like to. Anywhere you see a list of minions, whether it's in your filter, whether it's in your all minions list, you can actually kick those out to CSV, and I'll talk about that in a second with the reporting workspace. What time do we end, Rob? 11:30? Do you guys know when this ends? Because I'll go all day, so we gotta be careful.
I was going to say 11:30.
Okay, when I'm done. We could be a while. Okay, let's go over and look at the jobs workspace. Now the jobs workspace is the one that we're still working on in this sprint. It's a little light, and we acknowledge that. I was talking to Sam, maybe Wellington. Right now, I think we should just put lines on there to make it look like a recipe card, but anyway, that's not what we're gonna do. Basically what the jobs workspace is it allows you to have a list of jobs, and this is where you go in and create and edit jobs. SaltStack Enterprise allows you to do any job that you would do at the open source. So you can do salt run, you can do full-blown orchestrates, you can do normal salt commands. You basically put the command in. This is where you would put a saved target in if you wanted to put a target in. You can specify by target type and then add some functions. This box is actually relatively smart. If you type certain types of functions in, it actually will open a new field to be able to let you put in arguments. We have some things over here. We're actually going to be able to tie in a pillar file to this job. So if you want this job to access a particular pillar file or a particular state file, you can. And then we also have another action button here. And again, we need to move this over so it's consistent. But you can then take this job and run this against a pre-saved target. This is where one of the areas where you could grant someone access to these 4 jobs, and here's the 4 targets that you can run them against, and then off they go. They can't do anything else. They can't even see anything else. The job workspace also has the same job history view. So these views are consistent. Always, you just get to see different access or different views of what's in the system. And then the same thing is true here. You can actually see the job data. You can see who ran it, when it started, those kinds of things. Show them how we can modify the column headers. Is that working here? So you can actually select and change the column headers. There's more on the targets one. You can actually choose which column headers are important to you and kind of reorder and customize that. That's on a per user basis, so your UI can look what you want it to look like, not what was dictated from somewhere else. More pop-ups here. Say that again. We could at one point. I think we shut that off for some reason. Can we move the columns left and right? Yeah, what happened is it was causing some problem with the way that filtering was running. We actually have searching available in the column headers, so we shut it off. As soon as we get that resolved, we'll move it so you can move the columns around. It should be in this release. If it's not, it will be in the Arctis release. Just from a high level, this one is Enterprise 5.0. All of our products are codenamed for Sith Lords, so it was previously known as Darth Maul release. We have a Darth Arctis release, which will be probably, we hope to be 30 to 45 days after this one ships. It's primarily intended to be a bug fix release, and then we're going to start to do content. I want to talk about content because this strategically is something for you guys that will be very important. And then we have what's called the Darth Nihilus release, which is probably going to happen sometime in late summer, early fall, which will add a whole bunch of new stuff like predictive failovers and those kinds of things. Anyway, so that's kind of what the rough roadmap looks like, but the moving columns around will either hit this release or probably the Arctis release. So let's talk a little bit. Are you going somewhere to show something in particular?
No, I'm just trying to.
You're just showing the job information? Okay. Let's talk a little bit about the jobs. Go back to jobs workspace when you get a second. So one of the things, and you can just leave the menu pinned out so I can see the list. I need this blank space here. I need everybody to be cognizant of this blank space right here. So one of the things which was most useful to enterprise customers and time-strapped customers, and one of the things we get asked all the time is, really powerful tool, how do I do this? I don't really know how to do this. So what we're going to be doing is, we've actually put in, and I can't remember, who did the SPM? Is that Mike or Tom?
Joseph.
Joseph? Joseph. He's in the corner? Joseph's here? He left. He knew I was going to call him out. Joseph's a shy guy. He's also an amazing cook and one of the coolest people you'll ever meet. We put this thing in the enterprise product called the SPM, the Software Package Manager. Tremendously powerful tool. What this allows us to do is package up SALT formulas, states, pillars, execution modules, even reports or UI if we need to, and deliver them to you out of band. So if we could create a SALT formula called, how to build an OpenStack infrastructure, or how to install a LAMP stack in a Docker container for full portability, or how to manage Dell switches, or whatever we want. And there's a lot of SALT formulas in the community today. Our community is very, very good at that. The SPM allows us to start delivering those formulas out of band and adding them here. So you'll see in the jobs folder, he's got just the jobs he's added or created. What you're going to see moving forward is SaltStack is going to start publishing sample jobs on a variety of topics. We have people on staff now that are starting to work on formulas, and we are hiring a full-time resource whose job is simply to create formulas and publish them. In the first release of Enterprise 5.0, you'll have to go to our website and download the formulas and then install them, and then you'll see a job here. You'll see a job that does, for example, a shell shock formula with a state and files that remediate the shell shock vulnerability. Or we have ones around Docker management. I know we have an OpenStack one right now. And then in probably nihilus, so sometime in the summer, we're actually gonna tie in a web service backend so that those things populate into your console automatically. So let's say you come to work one day and there's a new CV, there's a new vulnerability for Bash, like the Heartbleed vulnerability. We'll scan the CV list. We'll pick ones that we think are important and that maybe high relativity. I think Tom said we're going to try to keep current with the top 50 or top 100. We'll write a state file which remediates it. We'll write a filter which will identify machines that are vulnerable to it, and then we'll just publish it. And what'll happen is you'll come into the console, you'll get a notification up here in your alerts, and you'll notice that there's a new job down here. There'll be a divider, and it'll be labeled SALT formulas, and you'll have a new formula there to remediate the Heartbleed vulnerability. We plan to do formulas on Windows management. We plan to do formulas on cloud migration, public-private migration, private-public migration, HPC. We have about 150 of them on the docket ready to go. We just need to get the baseline in place so that we can start providing those. What that'll do for you guys is it'll give you two things. A, it will save you time because you don't have to write them yourselves. And even if you go in and make some small changes to them, it's a lot easier than starting from a blank slate. And B, you'll have guys that are so bright they're hard to talk to sometimes, like Shane, for example, one of our developers, or Mike back here, who many of you have talked to, providing a formula or a method that is the single best way to do that particular thing. So you can A, not spend the time doing it, and B, be reassured this is the best way to execute this particular task. And we'll continue to publish those out over time. As long as you're an enterprise customer, we'll continue to build out and update the formula library. We've only got 7 minutes left, so let's talk real quickly about reports. That's the last kind of major thing. This is another workspace. The reports workspace is the one that I'm least proud of now, but I'll be most proud of when we ship. The reports workspace gives you we only have 5 in there. We're gonna have about 15 in there when we ship. But basically lets you pick a report and then pick a target that you wanna run it against and then get some data back. This one doesn't look as good as our QA server, which has 45 different operating systems. But basically the inner ring will tell you how many Red Hat total, and then the outer ring will break down the differences. So if you have Debian is a good one. So you have 66% of your machines are Debian, and then the outer ring will break it down on sub-builds. So Debian, Ubuntu, any other variants. And then you can also scroll down and see you can actually see the data list at the bottom. And then, like I said earlier, you'll notice over here, this little blue CSV, you can kick that out as a CSV file, which will either open or download depending on your browser settings, to give you a direct access to that. So from a roadmap perspective, we understand that giving you 15 reports out of the box, literally 5 seconds after we ship, somebody's gonna be like, hey, how come I don't have this one report? I mean, you could get the smartest dude in the world and they'll miss the one you need. The roadmap is we will be providing a report builder. We have provided the export to CSV, and that export to CSV works in the filter as well. So you can actually go into the all minions target, do a custom filter to drill down and get the list you want, and then kick that as a CSV to provide to a third-party reporting tool. You do have access to the database, so you can tie a Tableau or a third-party reporting tool into it. And then the other thing is remember we talked about workspaces? You'll notice this workspace palette is kind of short. We actually are talking to vendors now. We have some of them here as partners. We're going to extend these out. You're going to see other workspaces show up in the future. So for example, we'll add an application management workspace where you go in and your workflow is from the perspective of applications first. You'll have tie-ins to Git, you'll have application code, and you'll tie pre-built targets into that application so you can actually manage your infrastructure from perspective of your application. We will be able to add workspaces for, say, Sumo Logic. Let's say you use Sumo Logic, or let's say you use Nagios, or let's say you use Tableau. We can integrate those things and pull those right in as a workspace and bring their data in and display it natively in the console so you can get that data there as well. So the UI is actually designed to grow and extend over the next 12 to 18 months into several areas, including network management, storage management, which we do already. You can do that, but we'll actually call them out in workspaces to make them easier to manage and easier to see. Okay, I'm going to pause right there. Rob, is there anything huge I missed? Anything you wanted to point out?
No, but I think we should open up for questions.
That's what I wanted to do. Questions?
And before you ask, let's grab a mic.
Yeah, or he can tell it to me and I can also just repeat back.
So the interface is really snappy as you're demoing it. How well does that work if your server running it in the States and your clients accessing it are in Europe?
Okay, the question is the UI is really snappy, and how does it look if the server is in the UK or in Europe and the clients are in America or somewhere else? It's actually pretty good. We're actually been surprised. Because it's designed as a completely separate thing and we've put some mechanisms in to tell you that data is still being populated. One of the things Salt users, this is an interesting paradigm. Everybody says Salt's so fast, Salt's instantaneous management. Salt by design is asynchronous. By design, it's an asynchronous management tool. It's designed to send down to the minions do their thing, and then it sends them back. And so we've put some things in the GUI, and GUIs are never quite as fast as command lines. So we've put some things in the GUI like load indicators where data starts to come back and you can work with it, but data is still flowing back through the enterprise API system. But it's actually pretty fast. Interestingly enough, we had our first real user load test yesterday when we went to the lab and we had 90 plus users. And the cloud infrastructure vendor that we were using had a problem. We couldn't get to all the instances we need. So we picked one instance and logged 90 users into the one instance with how many?
And
we had a ton of minions.
Right, and it only had 2 gigs of memory on that box as well.
2 gigs of memory, 2 processors, and it smoked. It was very, very fast. So it's designed. This is part of why we introduced the new Enterprise API versus the older one. The older one was performant, but it was a single master performant, and the front end that we used, I can't even remember the name of it. I've repressed it from my memory, and I'm not going to bring it back. It's months of counseling. Eliminated. But anyway, the React.js front end that we've had 50,000 minions in there distributed on 2 different data centers, and it scrolls and is very performant. And that's something we'll continue to focus on. One of the things we want is the front end to be as performant as the back end or close enough. Question back here.
We got one more question.
You mentioned bringing in Sumo Logic, things like that.
Uh-huh.
Is there any desire to bring in like exception handling as well?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. So logging. So one of the views down here, if you look at the view switcher down here, oh, I'm on the wrong thing. Well, imagine, if you will, the view switcher that was down here. We have a command view which shows you all the events that happen in the system. So exception handling is an area which we're focusing on. So we'll capture exceptions, we'll put them in a log, we'll tie those into an audit for that particular target or minion, and then we will allow you to tie reactors, either simple reactors or thorium-based intelligent reactors to this to do either alerting or auto remediation. Usually both, usually alert first, approval, and then auto remediation. We actually have a partnership with ServiceNow, which allows us to do that, but we actually on the roadmap, and again, consider yourself under NDA for the next 30 seconds. We're actually going to be doing some basic approval through a mobile piece we have on the roadmap. So if you want to do a remediation job, it'll ping you and give you the ability to say yes and then move on. Other questions?
Okay, we're going to have to wrap it up. They pinged us at the door.
Okay.
Just one last thing. Make sure after this, fill out the survey for this session, and let them know just how wonderful a job that Matt does up on stage.
Shameless
and out
plug.
here showing you guys what our massive, awesome team has been putting together.
So let me say this. Appreciate that, Rob. I'm going to take one more question. I will be available via the rest of the conference. We have demo booths out there. There's people there all day willing to talk to it and answer the questions. Feel free to come up and answer questions for me. I like questions and I like comments, but I mostly like criticism. I'd like you to point out to me, oh, I don't like this, or this thing needs to be here. This is my weird use case. Can you cover that? So one last question and then we'll go. Uh-huh. Say that again. LDAP integration out of the box? Yeah. LDAP 80 integration is out of the box, and we can do others via PS if we want, and then we'll add others as we go. So good question. Thank you so much for your time. I appreciate you being here, and I hope you have a great conference.